Good morning, Vietnam. Should I start like that? I don't know. Anyway, we're going to do another one of our Vietnam videos. And this one is about the statistics, and it's to give you a perspective that you might not have had before. So I'm going to say yet again that we try to make our videos something you didn't know. And it would be really good if some of my American friends, I understand if you're English, Australian, Canadian, Botswanan, and you say, I didn't know that. But it'd be really good if some of my American friends can say, wow, I didn't know that. And we're talking about the Vietnam War. So the Vietnam War is said to have gone from 1955 through to 1973. And Australian troops left Vietnam in July of 73. But the French, that's where it all started with the French. We're going to do at least one video about the French in Vietnam. But this video is about who went where and when. And you might be surprised to know that in 1962, Australia sent 30 military advisors to Vietnam to help the South Vietnamese fight the Viet Cong, the Red Peril, the communism. That is 1962. By 1965, Australia had 7,672 troops in Vietnam. 7,672. For Australia, a small country, that was a lot to have in Vietnam. So what we'll do now though, let's do this comparison with America. So what we're going to look at is that on the 8th of March, 1965, there were 25,000 Americans in Vietnam classed as advisors. This is the date when everything changed, when it stopped being advisors, especially when you think you've got 25,000 advisors, and that's because on that date 3,500 US Marines landed in Vietnam and it was on. No more advisors, backstep, just watching, just aiding. The Vietnam War is now on. So when I say that's 65, 23,000 advisors and then another 3,500 US Marines. Very quickly we moved 2 years to 1967, and by 1967 that total of 26,500 in the US personnel has climbed to a staggering 465,000. The biggest number of US troops in Vietnam, that peaked in April of 1969, and that was 543,000. What a staggering figure. More than 500,000 US troops in Vietnam in April of 69. If you've been to Washington, certainly if you're an American, you've seen the Wall of Remembrance, then you know that the death toll for America killed in Vietnam was 50,000. 50,000 rank and file were killed, plus another 8,000 officers and more senior NCOs. So an NCO, non-commissioned officer, is a sergeant. When they say senior NCOs, they're talking more about regimental sergeant majors, gunnery sergeants, I think they're called in the Marines. So there we have 58,000 were killed in total. So how do those statistics work? Because yes, 50,000 is a horrendous number on its high, but equally, how many men actually went in total to Vietnam from America? So in the period of 1964 to 1973, 27 million American men were eligible for the draft. 27 million were eligible. Only 40% of that number actually got drafted. You see movies like American Graffiti, Lots of different movies. Draft dodger movies, young men going in, being drafted, Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now. The reality is, you had a 40% chance of being, it wasn't even 50-50. It was 40% chance of being drafted. No one wants to go to Vietnam and be killed, but still, 40% of the eligible men is all that was drafted. Of that 40% that were drafted into the army, only 10% actually went to Vietnam. So you had a 4 in 10 chance of being drafted. If you were drafted, you had a 1 in 10 chance of being sent to Vietnam. It's still like playing Russian roulette though, isn't it? It's still that one live round in the chamber. At the time, as I've told you about here, 64 to 73, the population of America that was black was 11%. 11% of the population was black. 12% of the deaths were black. What that meant was more blacks were getting killed per ratio than whites, and it was because there was seen to be more blacks whacked into the various units. This caused political upheaval, drama, and it changed the way America did things, and they had to reduce the number of blacks in combat. And so by the time the war actually ended, it had swung the other way, and the death rate for blacks had dropped below their percentage in the population, if that makes sense. What this is linked to is my video about the Battle of Long Tan, where more conscripts were killed than regulars, and that caused the Australian Army to change its number of conscripts in action. Likewise, the American Army had to change the number of blacks in action. So we're still on statistics. What we've gone through is you've been drafted, you've been unlucky enough to be drafted, you've then been unlucky enough to be sent to Vietnam. So now what we find is that 30% of the conscripts that went to Vietnam were killed. 30% were killed. It's pretty grim to think that you got a 1 in 3 chance. If you're a conscript, you've got a 1 in 3 chance that you're going to be killed, because the statistics for conscripts were that high. We've talked about how many were killed from America. Terrible, terrible thing, but just to give you some perspective, New Zealand sent a small contingent to Vietnam. They had 3 civilians killed and 37 military personnel killed and 187 wounded in the time of the whole involvement at the Vietnam War. But now, just statistics about American personnel is that when you look at the fifth total of 58,000 that were killed, 30% of them were initially wounded and then died from wounds. That is a pretty scary statistic. It just showed that even though you were out in combat and you got wounded, there was still things still weren't good. You still had to get back to base. You still had to recover. You just couldn't have infection. Of the casualties, 30% were as a result of friendly fire or a non-combat situation, which car accident, truck rollover, car rollover, something like that. So that takes another 30%. If you then say, oh, hang on, does that include all the planes that crashed and helicopters that were shot down? No, 14% of that 58,000 killed, 14% of them were killed in aircraft or helicopter crashes. That was either crew or personnel on the aircraft. 27%, a staggering 27% of those deaths were as a result of booby traps, landmines, and those hidden IEDs. Forgive me for ad-libbing and not remembering what they're called. but that was 27% of the deaths were made up booby traps and mines. So when we look at the Australian statistics, we have 521 killed in combat in Vietnam. So we have 6 MIAs, 6 missing in action, but it's pleasing to report that after they had been recorded as MIA, all 6 were found and were found safe and well. We have 74 further deaths that were caused by what's called other, and we talked about that with the American statistics: car crashes, accidents, non-combat issues, and 3,129 were wounded. So between 1962, 1970 when withdrawal started, and 1973 July when Australia finally pulled out, a total of 60,000 Australian troops. 60,000 Australian. We're a small country, and we sent 60,000 troops to fight in Vietnam between 1962 and 1973. So what the statistic that we can be left with is that in total, the United States sent 3,100,000 men to Vietnam. 3.1 million troops went to Vietnam from the United States. They suffered 58,000 deaths, and that means 1 in every 53 that America sent to Vietnam got killed. Australia sent 60,000 troops. We lost 521, and that means that of every 115 we sent to Vietnam, 1 got killed. Sobering statistics, terrible to give numbers, to just talk numbers. That's all this video has been about. But really, it's about giving a perspective, how long we were there, what the losses were, how stupid some of those losses were, and a perspective of Australia, America, and I mentioned New Zealand too, of having the deaths, that wounded that New Zealand had. So, it's been a long video because it's got a bit, this has been a long video, and it's been fairly well edited by the time it hits the screen, because I made a few stuff-ups with the stats. But cheers, stay tuned, watch for more videos. Thanks for watching if you got to the end of this one. Many thanks, cheers.